Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. You are very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. The PM's in Bali as the G20 meeting of world leaders gets underway with a warning for Vladimir Putin that Russia will hear a chorus of global opposition to the war in Ukraine. We'll bring you all the latest live from Bali this morning, and we'll hear from the chair of the Defence Select Committee, that's Tobias Ellwood from Ukraine, and the former head of the British Army, Lord Dannatt, back home ahead of the autumn statement this week. We'll be joined by Labour's Lisa Nandy. Lots to come in a very busy programme. It's Tuesday, the 15th of November. Get out of Ukraine, the Prime Minister's message to Moscow as the G20 gets underway in Indonesia.
I'm live in Bali as world leaders gather. The global impact of Russia's war in Ukraine top of the agenda.
A warning from NHS bosses who say they're more worried about this winter than any before it.
A lack of staff, gaps in rotas means that trusts can't provide the high quality of care that they would like to provide.
And today, the Health Secretary will meet union bosses to try and avert the growing threat of coordinated strikes that could cripple the NHS.
The head of the Civil Service Union calls for changes to how ministerial complaints are handled after allegations of bullying made against the Deputy Prime Minister.
I'm live from Lagos, which is expected to become the world's largest city by the end of the century.
Also ahead, the impact of the cost of living crisis on pets. We'll speak to a national charity calling for more support. And joined by the man who built himself an arm out of Lego after years of hiding his missing limb. Morning, everybody. The Prime Minister has told Russia to get out of Ukraine as the leaders of the world's biggest economies gather in Bali this morning for the G20 meeting of the world's largest economies. According to Downing Street, Rishi Sunak criticised Vladimir Putin for not joining the meeting and said Russia will never have a legitimate seat at the table. Faced with the growing cost of living crisis and ahead of the autumn statement on Thursday, the PM is expected to use the summit to call for countries to end their dependence on Russian exports. Let's get more, should we, from our Asia correspondent Cordelia Lynch, joining us live from the summit. Gets underway today, although there have already been some bilateral meetings, haven't they, Cordelia? Good morning.
Good morning to you. Yes, we saw President Biden of America and President Xi Jinping of China yesterday meeting. Those two have been going through a very tense period in relations between them. But we saw both men trying to signal a conciliatory tone. They talked about both wanting to ensure that they weren't sliding towards another Cold War period. They talked about their red lines, about the desire not to go towards conflict in the Taiwan Strait, something that has been a cause of international concern recently. So that was certainly a sign of progress. It was the first face-to-face meeting since Joe Biden became president. Aside from that, though, what is looming large, central to this summit, is the war in Ukraine. Now, Vladimir Putin is not present, but he has sent his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, a man who's often accompanied with a bit of drama. Now, there was news yesterday that he had been rushed to hospital with a heart condition, a claim that he dismissed. Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister, really wanted to take this moment, his first real test on the global stage, to make clear his position on the war in Ukraine, something he referred to this morning in the opening session with world leaders where Sergei Lavrov was present, as a barbaric war. He called on Russia to end it. He talked about a global chorus of opposition, and he connected it too with the economic challenges that the world is facing. I mean, this, of course, being a gathering of industrialized nations that are all staring down the barrel of an imminent recession. The key question, though, is what material progress are they going to make as a result of this? Sergei Lavrov, there's always been a concern that no communique will be published. I think that is the expectation, and that's in part because Russia will not agree, of course, to condemn itself, and the world leaders have not been able to agree so far on wording when it comes to Russia's war in Ukraine. So it may be viewed by many people as a diplomatic failure, ultimately, of a kind of toothless summit, if you like, but everyone present keen to show some kind of material achievements. We will have to wait and see. But Rishi Sunak, I think, very deliberately trying to stake his claim to global politics, his positioning when it comes to Russia as well, and he'll have more of that as we go on throughout the day.
Interesting, isn't it, Claudia, forgive me, that there's a lot of criticism for Putin for not coming, but even if he had come, most of the leaders would not have sat down with him.
Yeah, look, this is fundamentally a very awkward dynamic because I think if he forced that position, there was talk of a possible walkout. There's been talk as well of a walkout on Sergei Lavrov. So far, we have not seen that take place. But what we're seeing at the moment is a lot of kind of strident language, but not much beyond. So I think they have their back somewhat against the wall. They need to see how hard they can press on Russia. And Sergei Lavrov is known for some unpredictable theatrics. But look, if they come out of this G20 summit in Bali, all the costs and efforts associated with no real kind of commitments on Ukraine and no real material changes when it comes to staving off the threat of a recession globally, I think many people will be asking, well, what's the point?
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot, Cordelia. Obviously, we're going to get more information from the G20 throughout the course of the day, including an interview that we are presently carrying out with Rishi Sunak. So do stay tuned for more on that. Meantime, I want to talk to you about what's happening with the health service, and Steve Barclay will meet union bosses later on today to try to avert the looming threat of strikes in the NHS. Nurses have already voted in favour of walkouts over pay, as you know, with other NHS workers, including ambulance crews, midwives, hospital porters and cleaners, currently being balloted. Meanwhile, bosses from a number of NHS trusts say they're more worried about this coming winter than any other. Check this out. A report by NHS providers found that 87% say this winter will be worse than any before it. 86% also say they're worried about meeting demand for services over the next 12 months. And 93% say they're concerned about staff burnout. 94% are worried that not enough investment is being made in social care. The interim chief exec of the NHS providers told Sky News this will have an impact on the quality of care.
We know that a lack of staff, gaps in rotas, means that trusts can't provide the high quality of care that they would like to provide. So it means that people may need to wait longer for appointments. It may mean that on wards they need to wait longer to be attended to, and that isn't ideal. And in some scenarios it may mean that appointments or procedures are cancelled, and nobody wants to see that because we know how long people have been waiting. And this isn't just for hospital care and routine procedures. We are talking about mental health services and community services as well.
Let's get more on this, should we, with Ivor. Hi, Ivor. We do know that the Health Secretary is engaging with unions. What hope is there?
Yeah, it's pretty bleak stuff, this, isn't it? The most pressing concern, clearly, for the government is this threat of strike action. That's why the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, will be meeting union bosses here later this morning to try and avert a mass walkout. At the moment, only nurses have voted to strike, but according to the Telegraph, the 6 largest health unions have already balloted members and discussed a coordinated mass walkout to try and maximise disruption. And if that went ahead, it wouldn't just be nurses who would be striking, it'd be midwives, paramedics, ambulance technicians, hospital cleaners, hospital porters, also 999 call handlers. And if that went ahead, I think it'd be the NHS itself on life support. Strikes, however, as we've heard there from that survey, are only one aspect of the problems the NHS faces, which has prompted this dire warning from healthcare bosses. On top of that, this winter, there's also all the usual winter pressures, but also the potential COVID resurfacing. We've got the record-long waiting list, more than 7 million people waiting for treatment. There's severe staff shortages, the cost of living crisis. The problems are everywhere healthcare bosses look. The Department of Health have come back to us with a statement in reply to this survey, saying that they are working to boost capacity, they're working to develop a long-term plan to recruit and retain staff. Long-term plans are one thing. Clearly the concern here, though, is the immediate term, the short term.
OK, Vinay, thank you. Thanks a lot. Let's return now to what's happening in Bali and, of course, in Ukraine as well, joined by the chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, who's in Odessa in Ukraine this morning. Hello to you, Mr. Ellwood. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. First of all, why are you there?
Well, firstly, to better understand what is actually happening here, we're at a critical juncture in this war with Russia, and there's huge appreciation, I should say, for the British commitment to what we've done to help Ukrainians push back the third largest army in the world. But Putin is now humiliated, and there's huge concerns that he's going to go more extreme. He's going to find more imaginative ways to raise the stakes. And he's starting to regroup the other side of the Dnieper River. And it's so important that that message is said at the G20, as the Prime Minister has been underlying, that we don't give up now, that we don't sign a deal, that we don't step back, that we're able to flush Russia completely out of Ukraine. And that's certainly the strong message that we're getting here, myself and the Defence Select Committee.
Do you think that President Putin should have attended the G20 summit in Bali?
Yes, understandably why he didn't. The last time he turned up at an international conference, he was humiliated, I think, by the Indian Prime Minister and others who said, "What are you doing in Ukraine?" So he sent Lavrov instead, but ultimately Lavrov is just going to give us the lines that Putin is spouting to say that this is nobody else's business. It is our business, because the grain ships behind me are not moving as they should do, and security in Eastern Europe is everybody's security. If we don't flush Russia out of Ukraine now, how can Ukrainian economy move forward? How can the sovereign identity of Ukraine exist? This is the time to do it. If we sign any deal now, all Russia will do is regroup to attack again in a year or two's time. It has to happen now.
I thought a deal had been done as far as the grain was concerned, breadbasket of Europe, of course, to get it out of Odessa and to parts of the world that need it most. What happened?
Yeah, I mean, but this shows that Russia has continued to be setting the agenda, and we've been following it. This was Russia's deal, and they controlled the movement of ships. But actually, this, as I suggested before, should be an international humanitarian safe haven with a UN stamp of approval that removes Russia from it. You have Ukrainian territorial waters here linking up to international waters in the Black Sea. That should have nothing to do with Russia. Yet Russia is the one that set this deal, and only 1/5 of those ships are actually leaving this port, meaning that the world, Africa, and indeed Europe is not being fed on the scale. And of course, that causes rises in food prices, knock-on inflation problems elsewhere. So we need to lean further into this. This is the moment now to take the responsibility of this port away from Russia back to Ukraine and the international community.
There have been some successes. We've seen what's happened in Kherson, and we've seen that President Zelensky has gone along to congratulate his troops and also to offer solace and support to those that live there and have lived under Russian control for the last 8 months. But Jens Stoltenberg, NATO Secretary General, has urged the West not to make the mistake of underestimating Russia. You would agree with that?
100%. I mean, firstly, Kherson is massively humiliating for Putin. They've had to withdraw across the Dnieper River, but Russia still has control of the size of Portugal in Ukraine. So this is far from over. So Jens Stoltenberg is absolutely right to encourage NATO members to continue providing that individual bilateral support, as Britain is doing, because munitions and so forth, weapon systems, they need to keep going. The battle is actually moving away from the battlefield, as I said, with Putin attacking electricity and infrastructure and so forth, trying to break the morale of the Ukrainian people by freezing them out this winter. But at the moment, there is a lull in war fighting because there will be a spring offensive, and that's what we need to build up and prepare for.
Although Zelensky, looking at these pictures, has said that this illustrates the beginning of the end of the war. Do you not agree with him?
No, absolutely I do, because it's showing that Russia can't hold the line, that the Ukrainian offensive, the incredible fighting will of the Ukrainian forces are able to then push back. But this isn't the moment, as I say, to sign that deal, to leave Russia in control of part of Ukraine. It requires additional effort. It means another 6 months or a year, if you like, of what we're doing now. And the worry is that the West's interest, commitment, and so forth will start to drain away. We don't have good form on this. If you look at all the places that we've been to try and provide, a force for good, from Libya, Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and so forth, we've actually given up and gone home, leaving problems there. We mustn't do the same here. This is in everybody's interest, but particularly, of course, Ukraine's, that we stay here and see this through.
Where does this leave us when it comes to how much of our GDP we will be spending on defence going forward? We know that Liz Truss said that was going to be 3.5% when pushed. Rishi Sunak said to me during the summer about 2.5%, although Ben Wallace said that when he was at the Treasury, he was forced to say that. He was overruled by the Prime Minister. And the latest we're hearing in the papers this morning is that it could be less than 2.5% our defence budget. What would you say in response?
Yeah, well, we're slowly understanding and appreciating why hard power matters, why a strong defence is absolutely critical to defend our interests, whether they're around the UK or actually here in Ukraine. There is a symbiotic relationship between our economy, between our prosperity, and our ability to trade around the world. And the world is getting more dangerous, not less. So we drop our guard at our peril. That will affect our economy. And I hope that's the message that we'll hear on Thursday from the Chancellor, who he himself, as former Foreign Secretary, recognises the importance. There's also an absence of international leadership, dare I say. We are doing much better at stepping forward, encouraging others to follow. It's tougher to do that if you don't have the hard power yourselves to provide that example.
We're hearing that the traditional G20 family photo has actually been called off. One wonders how much this summit might actually achieve. But then you look at the fact that the Chinese leader and the US president have got together face to face for the very first time. Does that give you some succor?
I think we should always welcome conversations between the two world's largest powers, China and the United States. Absolutely. But I, for one, will not drop my guard in being concerned about where China is going in the long term and its symbiotic relationship with Russia, despite what they say publicly. In our lifetimes, China will become stronger, larger than the United States, militarily, economically, technologically. And that's important to understand as to how we manage that, how we actually defend our international values and standards, which China is keen to exploit. So, of course, we welcome these talks, but don't kid ourselves that China still wants to, is watching carefully what's going on here because it still wants to lay claim to Taiwan.
Final thought before I let you go, and on domestic politics, Liz Truss and her then Chancellor, not Rishi Sunak, of course, Kwasi Kwarteng, apparently their mini-budget cost the UK economy something like £34 billion in just 6 weeks. They've both gone now. They're entitled to £18,000 and £16,000 severance pay, if you will, each. Should they take it?
Well, there's other examples of ministers who have been in office for a very short time offering to give that money back to the taxpayer or indeed to charity and so forth. I think it's for those two individuals to work out what they should do. I would say, though, that it has been a very difficult summer. There's no doubt about it. But I've had faith in the British democracy, the parliamentary system. We are able to flush out, a leader, a government, if we're going in the wrong direction. And we can do that quite ruthlessly in a short period of time, unlike other countries, the United States, for example, where if you do get a leader that's going to take you in the wrong direction, you have to wait 4 years. So there is a positive there, but ultimately the details you're talking about, it's for the individuals, I think, to recognize and do the right thing.
What would you do? Would you give the money back?
Yes, I think there is no justification for that short period of time. I'd have the necessary conversations and make sure that you do the right thing. You've got to be able to, in politics, be able to look in the mirror and say, yes, I made the right decision.
Good to talk to you, as always. Safe journey back. Look forward to seeing you in the studio soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come on the programme for you this morning, speaking to the head of the FDA union, which represents civil servants, about his letter to Rishi Sunak. He's asking for a better complaints process amid the latest bullying allegations. Major supermarkets are asking the government to expand eligibility for free school meals. We'll hear from restaurant owner and cookery writer Henry Dimbleby. And former US President Trump, of course, expected to launch his third campaign for the White House today. We'll be speaking to one of his former campaign advisors later in the programme. I should just say thanks for all your emails and notes yesterday about my cold. It is a lot better. It's that one of those irritating coughs right at the end, you know, when you can't get rid of it. But thank you for all your notes. I really appreciate it. In the last few minutes, the ONS has released their latest monthly unemployment figures. What are they looking like? Let's find out. Gurpreet is standing by for us. Hi, good morning. Tell us more.
Good morning. Yeah, there's a lot to look at in this report, but I think the key takeaway is that the economic downturn is starting to have a real impact on the jobs market. The headline rate of inflation stayed close to a record low, ticked up slightly to 3.6%. But what's really interesting is that the level of vacancies in the economy, which is a pretty good indicator of the demand for workers in the economy, fell by 46,000. Now, it wasn't very long ago that we were talking about a red-hot jobs market as we emerged from lockdown. Businesses were really struggling to recruit, asking where have all the workers gone. Things are changing now. Businesses possibly taking a look at their costs, making a judgment on the economic outlook and deciding that now is not the time to be putting out job adverts. And that scarcity for workers that businesses once experienced isn't going to be a problem anymore, because the Bank of England last week warned that we're heading for a very prolonged 2-year recession, and as part of that, the unemployment rate will close to double by 2025. So a pretty bleak outlook, but there is a slither of good news in there, depending on what perspective you take, of course, because one thing that the bank has been worried about with a tight labour market is that it could put pressure on wages, fueling inflation further in the economy. At the moment, there are no signs of that. Although wages did tick up more than expected, real wages, that's when you take inflation into account, fell by 2.6% over the period. So good news for the bank, possibly, but not so for workers who are already seeing the pound in their pocket being eroded by inflation, something Jeremy Hunt referenced just now in a statement in reference to the labour market figures.
OK, for now, thank you. Looking at some of today's other stories for you, making the news this morning, the price of some popular branded foods have as much as doubled over the last 2 years, according to research from Which magazine. The war in Ukraine and the rebound from COVID lockdown are said to be the main reasons. Heinz tomato ketchup, can you believe it, saw the biggest average percentage increase, up by more than 50%. The average cost of Twinings everyday tea bags has increased by 17% compared to 2020. And even basic items like Hovis wholemeal bread is up 43%, now costing nearly £2 a loaf. Head to skynews.com to see the full list of 79 items across 6 major supermarkets. China's signalled that its zero-COVID policy could be relaxed, with reports mass testing could be scrapped. Instead, the country is looking to implement a new system where only the vulnerable are tested. George Eustace, who was sacked by Liz Truss, says she rushed the trade deal with Australia and New Zealand. Mr Eustace said the deal was not good for the UK and blamed her for the negotiations. Hundreds of factory workers at a plant that makes Twiglets, Jaffa cakes and Jacobs Cream Crackers are striking in a row over pay. The GMB union says that employees won't return to the Aintree site until the company comes back to the negotiating table. Global population has reached a significant milestone. The United Nations says more than 8 billion people now live on the planet. Projections indicate that India will surpass China as the most populous country in 2023. Let's get more, should we? Yusra is standing by for us in Lagos. Good morning to you. What's the situation there?
Good morning, Kay. I mean, we're in the most populated city in Africa, and Lagos is one of the most heaving, busy cities I've ever been to. Here, you can really feel that the world's population has hit 8 billion, and that's just over 1 billion people in just over 11 years now on planet Earth. Lagos itself has grown exponentially over the last few decades. It was once a small coastal town, and now it's this heaving city that attracts people from all over West Africa. But the infrastructure is really suffering, and people have moved to the city for basic urban amenities that are now becoming more difficult. You've got power cuts at least once a day. You've got issues with waste disposal and sanitations in some poor neighborhoods in the city, and people are really struggling.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Well, the Prime Minister facing calls to reform the complaints process of for civil servants, I should say, amid bullying allegations levelled at his deputy, Dominic Raab. Let's talk about it in more detail. And my guest with me here in the studio is the General Secretary of the FDA Union, and that's Dave Penman. Hi, Dave. It's good
morning.
to see you. Thanks for joining us. What have you heard?
Well, what's quite clear is there are credible complaints from a number of government departments about Dominic Raab, just like there were credible complaints about Gavin Williamson before it. And what's quite clear is that civil servants do not have confidence in the current process for raising complaints against ministers. The only way they can raise a complaint is through the ministerial code, which requires not only the Prime Minister to consent to an investigation taking place, but the Prime Minister is the ultimate arbiter on that complaint as well. And as we saw with the Priti Patel complaint, despite evidence of bullying, he refused to acknowledge that she'd breached the ministerial code. So there's no real way that civil servants feel they can raise complaints, which is why this is the sort of situation we're facing with speculations coming out into the public rather than being dealt with through an effective complaints process.
Let's go back to that, but let me just ask you in a bit more detail, what sort of complaints have you heard about? Because the letter that you wrote to the Prime Minister, you didn't even name Dominic Raab, did you?
No, because it's not just about Dominic Raab. We've had complaints raised with us about a number of ministers over many years. This is about a system that's not effective in dealing with bullying by ministers. As we saw in Parliament, where you have a system that people don't have confidence in, they simply will not raise formal complaints. So when Number 10 say there are no formal complaints being raised, they're right, but that doesn't mean that concerns aren't being raised by civil servants. And even the Permanent Secretary in his government department has admitted that his behaviour was tantamount to bullying. So we've got a broken system just now. So rather than concentrating on Dominic Raab or Gavin Williamson, we want the Prime Minister to reform the entire system for dealing with complaints against ministers.
As I said, I do want to come on to that, but tell me about specific complaints that you've heard about Dominic Raab.
I don't want to get into that because it's not the forum for it. Our whole point is what we shouldn't be doing. It's not fair to Dominic Raab and it's not fair to civil servants.
But it's fair to the public if we've got people who are allegedly bullying in positions of high office. They're public servants. We should know about it.
Well, we should know, and ministers should have an effective way to either have their name cleared or for those investigations to be concluded and to face the consequences if they've been bullying. What we don't think is appropriate is that accusations are bandied about in the media, that's the only way that essentially civil servants can raise these now because the internal process isn't working.
No, I understand that, and that's why I'm pushing you on it, if I may, please, Mr Penman, because the Prime Minister disagrees with you. He says that there is no evidence that there's been bullying.
No, he doesn't. He says there's no formal complaints, and that's the point. People have no confidence in raising a formal complaint. A formal complaint would require the Prime Minister to consent to investigation, and there isn't even anyone just now who could conduct that investigation. Since June, we haven't had an independent advisor on ministers' interests. The Cabinet Secretary's made clear civil servants can't investigate ministers, so there isn't even anyone to investigate a complaint, whether that was about Dominic Raab or whether that was a new complaint about another minister. This is not a system that's fit for purpose.
So why don't your members make a formal complaint?
Well, we saw what happened when they raised a formal complaint. You know, when complaints were raised about Priti Patel, the Prime Minister sat on that report for 6 months. And then...
Different Prime Minister, of course.
It is a different Prime Minister. And then, despite the evidence that she had bullied civil servants, the Prime Minister refused to accept that, refused to say that she'd...
Well, this Prime Minister hasn't done that, and he has acted quickly. Once there was a formal complaint about Gavin Williamson, he acted quickly, and he's not there.
That's all good and well, but he still hasn't done so. So we're in a situation where the only way that a complaint could be raised about Gavin Williamson or Dominic Raab is if the Prime Minister agrees. The Prime Minister at this point in time could conduct and initiate an investigation into Dominic Raab to clear his name. He isn't doing so. Instead of that, we have this endless speculation about ministers, and civil servants have no confidence in the current process. It shouldn't be up to the whim of a Prime Minister about whether to support his political allies on whether an investigation is conducted into bullying and harassment amongst ministers.
You're not suggesting, though, that this Prime Minister, if he heard a formal complaint about bullying, would say, no, he's my mate, so I'm not listening?
I don't know, but that's been the experience in the past of Prime Ministers, inevitably. And
that's not with this one.
Well, what's the test of Rishi Sunak just now?
Gavin Williamson.
Gavin Williamson resigned.
No, he was sacked.
Is there an investigation into Gavin Williamson? So his resignation essentially means there won't be an investigation. So we actually have an independent process in Parliament that even though people resign and leave Parliament, it still concludes, it still brings a conclusion and a potential punishment. And when it comes to ministers, if they resign, they get off essentially scot-free and they're free to come back into Cabinet at a later date. The whole system just doesn't work when it comes to protecting civil servants from the conduct of ministers. It's only a few ministers. It's not the entire Cabinet, it's not the majority. But they're all now tainted by this because no one has confidence in the system. And even if, as we saw with the Priti Patel affair, that there's a conclusion from it, people don't actually believe it.
As I said, that was a different Prime Minister, a different era. Rishi Sunak says that he's wiping the slate clean. Are there other ministers or cabinet ministers that your members feel have behaved inappropriately toward them, serving ministers?
There are, yes. We've had...
How many?
I don't want to go into speculation of numbers or complaints.
It's not speculation. I mean, I'm just asking you how many.
No, because
so you must know.
People raise concerns with us. They haven't been investigated. That's only one side of a story. So I'm not going to come here and start banging about numbers or accusations as a result. The whole point about this is we don't have a process for dealing with this effectively. It's not fair on ministers and it's not fair on civil servants that the only way that these sorts of accusations end up coming out is speculation in the press.
So, just to be clear, your members are telling you, or not potentially you directly, but your colleagues who are coming to you to say that there are several other ministers in Rishi Sunak's government who have behaved inappropriately towards them.
Yes.
But you can't tell me how many.
I'm not going to go into speculating how many. That's probably...
And can you give me an idea of what sort of behaviour we're talking about? Is it bullying?
Yeah, most of what comes to us is inappropriate behaviour in terms of ministers, whether it's losing their temper, shouting, getting frustrated. Government's a tough place to work for civil servants and ministers. They know that. But at times, that behaviour can then verge into what people would characterise as bullying. And just like any other workplace, that needs an effective mechanism to address it, and that's not what we have. But this is a constant.
And so as a result, your members are coming to you because they feel they can't do anything else?
Yeah, because they have no confidence.
And what impact is it having on them?
Well, it blights careers. People end up leaving the job or leaving the post that they're in. If you imagine you're a civil servant, to work with ministers, to work at the heart of government, it's actually the pinnacle of your career. That's what you've wanted to do. You want to work in public service and work close with ministers and help deliver the government's agenda. So for those who have to leave, because that's the only choice that they've got, they either put up with that behaviour or they leave, it's hugely damaging to their careers and, of course, to their lives, because bullying can have a huge impact in people's lives.
And how do you help them? How do you support them through that?
Well, we can support them in terms of giving them advice about how to deal with it, whether that's a formal complaint, informally, broker, getting another job, moving outside of the area. That's sometimes the only option. You know, that's the difficulty, because it's more difficult to move a minister than it is to move a civil servant. Sometimes that's just what happens and people recognise it, but it can be hugely damaging to individuals.
Of course, I completely get that. But just to clarify, it's not just Dominic Raab that there are issues with, which is why you've not named names in the letter that you've written to the Prime Minister. There are other high-profile ministers who, in your opinion, as a union leader, are bullying civil servants, and the Prime Minister is doing nothing about it.
What I'm saying is that there are concerns raised about a number of ministers. That's essentially a constant in government. It's not just about this government, it's every government. There are dozens of ministers in stressful situations, and so at any point in time you're inevitably going to have a situation where there are concerns raised about the conduct of ministers. That's why what we're saying is this isn't just about Dominic Raab, it's not just about Gavin Williamson, it's about the entire system that deals with this. And if you don't have an effective system for dealing with that sort of behaviour, it almost encourages it.
And to what extent do you have some sympathy for those government ministers? We're in the middle of a war in Europe. We've got a cost of living crisis. There's been turmoil over the last 6 months or so, and they are also up against it.
Absolutely, as are the civil servants that support them loyally and serve government. I mean, as I say, civil servants who work closely with ministers are not shrinking violets. They know they've been working at the heart of government. They have to deal with all of the crises that ministers have to deal with as well. But they expect to be treated with dignity and respect. And they expect that if ministers don't do that, there would be an effective system for dealing with it.
Good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Much appreciated. Thank you. So, other high-profile ministers who are responsible for allegedly bullying civil servants. We'll talk about that to ministers as and when we get the opportunity. Before that, though, let me tell you about this. Olympics mascot, typically an animal of some kind. Rather more mundane for Paris 2024, it's going to be a red hat, apparently. 2 hats, one for the Olympics and one for the Paralympics, were spotted posing in Saint-Denis outside Paris. The conical red Phrygian cap became a symbol of the pursuit of liberty during the French Revolution, and is found today in schools and town halls. There you go. Will it catch on? Still to come after the break, speaking to the co-founder of Lyon Restaurants about free school meals and how the country's major supermarkets are calling on government to roll them out to more students. That's come. Hello again, everybody. You're very welcome to join us here on The Breakfast Show Tuesday morning. As you can see, Tamara is here. Lots to talk about today, Tamara. Good morning to, obviously, we've seen that Rishi Sunak is in Bali for the G20, although there won't be any photo call, apparently, at the end. He has been meeting with the Saudi leader.
He has. He's met with Mohammed bin Salman just now. He interestingly had...
Did he fist bump him?
He didn't, because as he told us in the debate, he's not a fist bump kind of guy. He has also been in a closed plenary session of the meeting yesterday, in which he criticised Russia's barbaric invasion of Ukraine. And in fact, Downing Street put out a picture of Rishi Sunak looking very angry at that meeting. So he has, as he promised, called out Russia's invasion. And of course, Russia's presence at that G20 summit makes it awkward for everybody else to have a photo together. So this is Rishi Sunak's first moment on the world stage, trying to bond with other democracies, and as he's put out his aims for the conference to try and rally support, against the Russian invasion.
All sorts of problems when he comes back home. Of course, he's got his autumn statement with his new Chancellor on Thursday. But these allegations by Civil Servants Union, which won't go away. And we know Dominic Raab, Deputy Prime Minister, under the spotlight. Was he the Justice Secretary now? Or maybe he's both, I forget. But it seems to change quite often, doesn't it? But the Dave Penman telling us just a few moments ago that several senior cabinet ministers responsible for alleged bullying.
Yes, I wonder if that interview that we just heard just now is going to be the start of something much bigger. Rishi Sunak promised to lead a government of integrity. He had to say goodbye to Gavin Williamson after only a couple of weeks as minister without portfolio because of allegations about his behaviour, which Gavin Williamson says he's going to fight to clear his name over. We've now heard a drip of allegations against Dominic Raab, who's currently the Justice Secretary and also back as Deputy Prime Minister. And alleged bullying of civil servants. It has been reported last night that the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, the most senior civil servant, was aware of these allegations, although it's claimed by Dominic Raab's side that there were no specific complaints ever put forward. But if Dominic Raab is now embroiled in claims about bullying, which he denies so far, and plenty of MPs have rallied to his defence, is Rishi Sunak going to be under fire again if any of these burst out into the open? Because as Dave Penman of the Civil Service Union was saying, because civil servants lack faith in the process for raising complaints internally within their departments, often they come out later in the media. So it could be that once you get one claim out in the open, several more people come forward. This is definitely a headache for Rishi Sunak. And who is taking Prime Minister's questions tomorrow in Rishi Sunak's absence? Dominic Raab. I wonder if Labour will mention this to him.
Yeah, but it's not just about, I think one of the points from Dave Penman, as you were making there, is that it's not just about Dominic Raab, is he? He's suggesting that there are other senior ministers that should also be under the spotlight.
Yes, we don't know who they are yet, but he's suggesting that this does go far wider. And the difficulty the Conservatives will have is that, you know, when you're putting people in departments after a very long time in government, you have to look very carefully at what skeletons may be around there. And certainly Rishi Sunak will not want to, after promising to get rid of sleaze and bad behaviour, will not want to be embroiled in any further problems over this after already having to lose a member of his cabinet just 2 weeks in.
Actually, this is what Dave Penman just told us here on the show.
There are concerns raised about a number of ministers. That's essentially a constant in government. It's not just about this government, it's every government. There are dozens of ministers in stressful situations. And so at any point in time, you're inevitably going to have a situation where there are concerns raised about the conduct of ministers. That's why what we're saying is this isn't just about Dominic Raab, it's not just about Gavin Williamson, it's about the entire system that deals with this. And if you don't have an effective system for dealing with that sort of behaviour, it almost encourages it.
And that effective system would look like what?
Well, there's two different things going on. So you've got the system by which people in Parliament, who work in Parliament, raise concerns. There's an independent system for doing that, which has been criticised, but the idea is to get through the complaints more quickly. And then the difficulty that he's talking about is in government departments where people can raise concerns under the ministerial code, saying a minister has broken the ministerial code, but they find, as Dave Penman was saying, that it's very difficult to get a hearing for their concerns, and often it's swept under the carpet and not dealt with. And as he says, ministers are in very stressful situations a lot of the time, and it's difficult to have a proper process often to hear these complaints. So he's saying that at all levels there are problems with people feeling that they're not going to be listened to, and therefore that's why these things come out in the media often after the event.
OK, Tamara. For now, thanks very much indeed. Tomorrow's Take at 9 o'clock. Looking forward to it. Other news, though, and major supermarkets are urging the government to expand eligibility for free school meals as food insecurity continues to rise, with chefs like Jamie Oliver and Tom Kerridge also supporting the cause. In a co-signed letter to the Education Secretary, that's Gillian Keegan, they wrote this: as food retailers, we witness firsthand the daily struggles our customers face to feed their families. We are committed to doing all we can to support them, with several actions set to be implemented in the coming months. But we cannot do this alone. We strongly urge you to consider the scale of children's food insecurity across the UK and act without delay to prevent its devastating consequences. Joined now by cookery writer and co-founder of Leon Restaurants, that's Henry Dimbleby. Hi, Henry, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme. Free school meals, how important are they at the moment?
Well, so this problem has actually been a long time in the making. Free school meals represent, during term time, probably about 50% of a child's calories during the day. And way back in 2013, when I was asked by government, with my business partner John, to do a review of school meals, we already saw then the cut-off for these free school meals is very low. It's currently at £7,400 before benefits. So if you earn more than that, your child doesn't get free school meals. And way back in 2013, we looked at the people, the million children who weren't eligible but were still living in poverty, and their lunches they're eating less, they're not getting the nourishment they need, they're not learning. And the problem now in this cost of living crisis, that threshold's hardly gone up at all over the last 10 years. and the problem is even greater than it was then. And this is absolutely essential. The government has quite rightly extended free school meal provision into the holidays. It now needs to ensure that the eligibility for that is all children in poverty, not just those right at the bottom of the pile.
And what impact does it have, the lack of access to free school meals for some kids? I'm looking at some facts and figures here. The Food Foundation estimating that 800,000 children in England are living in poverty, but they don't qualify for free school meals.
So there is a lot of data on it. So they don't learn, they're undernourished. I mean, it's setting children back in life. But I think I was talking to a head teacher in a school just the other day, and he was describing what that looked like, what those numbers looked like in practice. And he was talking about a young girl who was quite aggressive. She always used to barge to the front of the dinner queue to get a seat where she could eat her packed lunch. It was a seat next to the wall. And he realised that what she was doing was the fact that actually there was hardly anything in her packed lunch box, and she was ashamed, so she was pretending to eat a packed lunch while facing the wall. And I'm in schools all the time. We have a charity that helps schools improve their school meals. And it is worse than I have ever seen it. Those stories you hear all the time, children not able to eat, not able to learn, hungry. And I know there are a lot of trade-offs that government have to make at the moment in terms of spending, but surely supporting the diets of our most vulnerable children has to be at the top of the list.
OK, what do you want to say to Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary?
Well, what I'd like to say is, first of all, this has always been a problem that has been dealt with, thrown around government. So get together with the Secretary of State for work and pensions, get together with the Prime Minister and work out what your strategy is for these poorest children in society. And then secondly, look at the data and you will realise that part of that strategy has to come from your department expanding the eligibility for free school meals. It's 10 years out of date. And it is the best thing that you could do for those children as we go into this winter that, as we all know, is going to be pretty grim.
Good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Expecting a big announcement, huge, from Donald Trump today. The former US president expected to say whether or not he'll run for the White House again in 2024. But as the results of last week's midterm elections continue to trickle in, one of the former president's key backers, Carrie Lake, has lost her race in the key swing seat of Arizona, according to US media projections in the last few hours. Our correspondent Martha Kellner has the latest.
This was one of the closest elections of any across this country. It was also one of the most closely watched, and that's because of who Carrie Lake is and what she stands for. She is undeniably a magnetic performer. She was a local news broadcaster for a Fox affiliate station in Arizona, so she knows how to hold an audience, but she used her platform to become arguably the most prominent purveyor of Donald Trump's lie that the 2020 election was stolen. She called that on the campaign trail crooked and corrupt election, that 2020 election. She also attacked on numerous occasions what she called the fake news media. But more than half of Arizona voters have rejected Carrie Lake and what she stood for in favour of Katie Hobbs, the Democratic nominee there, who will become the Democratic governor.
A little bit later on this evening from Mar-a-Lago, whether or not President Trump plans to run in 2024. Meantime, Care England warns that the care sector under threat unless government acts immediately, and that a lack of central government investment in the workforce means there won't be enough care workers to look after our loved ones in the future. As you can see, Martin Green, Director, Chief Exec of Care England, joining me now. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. What challenges is the care sector facing?
We have a serious funding shortage, and we also have a serious workforce shortage. So Skills for Care data showed that there were 154,000 vacancies in social care, and that was up 52% on their previous data. So I think you'll see that not only have we got this funding crisis, but we've also now got a workforce crisis, and that's going to mean that people are not going to get services, and that's going to put huge pressure on families companies and local services, particularly local authorities.
Why is that?
Well, I think it's down to money, Kay. The bottom line is that there is not enough money in the system. Our colleagues do the most amazing work and they have a very skilled job to do, but they're not paid appropriately. We don't have a workforce strategy in social care where there is a workforce strategy in the NHS, and we're constantly competing with the NHS, but we're not given either the money or indeed a workforce strategy so that people can know they can have careers in social care.
Increasing the basic wage, which is what is one of the ideas that's been floated as part of the autumn statement, how would that help? Because that's suggesting that those wages would increase by 10%.
Yeah, I think we should remember that this is a very complicated job, and I think we need to put the people who work in social care on a different footing. So it's not about just increasing the wage, which is pretty inadequate at the moment, by 10%. It's also about saying we need to have a proper career structure, and people need to know they have careers in social care. There might be an entry level, but they know that they can quickly rise up the ladder and get a lot more money and also a lot more training and development. So I think it has to be part of a long-term workforce strategy.
Social care crisis, what impact does that have on the NHS? Because we're hearing that a lot of people who are in hospital, don't need to be there, but there's no support for them if they come out of hospital.
Yeah, it's having a huge impact on the NHS. And as you say, there are people in hospital now who don't need to be, but the reason they're there is because they can't get social care packages. But of course, that's the thing that gets the publicity. But there are about 10 times as many people in local areas waiting for social care assessments and services. So it's not only a problem for the NHS, but it's also a problem for people who are not getting the support they need. And what will happen to those people is they'll go into crisis and probably go into hospital, and then that compounds the problem in the NHS.
And so has the social care service always been a Cinderella service?
Yes, it has, unfortunately. You know, we've never really had the same status as the NHS, but we are an absolutely integral part of a health and social care sector. And what we need to see is parity of esteem, we need to see pay and conditions aligned, and we need to see social care respected, particularly because it does a very complex role. And the same people who are in the NHS are the same people who are in social care.
And do you envisage potentially industrial action, as we're seeing increasingly in the health service, in social care service?
I don't think we'll see industrial action, but what we will see is care staff walking and getting other jobs because there's higher pay and they're less difficult jobs. So in effect, what we'll see is a reduction in the amount of services available. So it won't be quite as stark as industrial action, but the impact will be enormous.
OK, it's good to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us in the studio this morning. Thank you. Coming up in the next hour of the programme, we were hearing from the Civil Servants Union leader in the last hour, and he has basically been telling us that there is a significant problem with senior ministers allegedly bullying their staff. He wouldn't go into any names or pack drill, but he did say it was something that the Prime Minister, when he comes back from the G20 in Bali, really does need to get his head around. I pressed him on his specific examples of what might have happened, and he talked about shouting and bullying by senior ministers. We'll talk about that with Labour in just a few moments' time. Lisa Nandi will be with us here on the programme.